All right, well, thank you all for being here on time for the start of the Environmental Justice Advisory Group meeting, October 26, 2018, 12 p.m. here in Conference Room GB. And don't let me interrupt your lunch. If you haven't got it, please grab it. And I think the first thing on our agenda is always call to order and opening comments. In terms of opening comments, I would just say we're going to hear about AB 617, the Community Air Protection Program work and update. And that's really the hot topic issue when it comes to environmental justice here at the moment. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't really have any other opening remarks, but would like to do introductions. I'm Joe Liu. I'm the governor's appointee here to the South Coast AQMD Governing Board. And Fabian, why don't you go ahead?
Fabian Wesson, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Legislative Public Affairs and Media.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Joe K. Gosh. I serve as the Health Effects Officer.
Rafael Yanez, community member, UCLA.
Manuela Redondo, representing the District 5, Supervisor Perez.
Danny Morales from Riverside.
Mary Figueroa, Riverside.
Donald Smith, Compton, California.
Oh. Go ahead, Ray.
Retta Alexander, Valley Interfaith Council, San Fernando Valley.
Hey, Jill Johnston with University of Southern California.
Larry Beeson, School Public Health, Loma Linda University.
Nancy Feldman, Council's Office.
Alicia Rodriguez, Senior Public Information Specialist with Legislative Public Affairs and Media.
Okay, great, thank you. The first thing on our item is approval of the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Did anyone have any comments, corrections, anything on the meeting minutes? Okay, I forget if we need to take a formal motion. Motion required, it says, so if someone...
There's no corrections to the minutes. I move that they be approved.
Okay, we have a second? Second from Rafael. All right, without objection, we'll consider them adopted. We don't have anyone on the phone, right? We don't have to do a roll call? Okay.
No.
I assume there's no public comment on that item too. Again, I'm going to need a rear view mirror, so if there's any public comment on any item, just come tap me on the shoulder or sit down right here and we'll let you address the committee. Follow-up, a review of follow-up action items. Fabian, do we have any?
No, there were no action items to follow up.
Okay. I guess so we can just keep moving on then to agenda item number 4. Get right into the AB 617 updates, and Dr. Joe K. Gosh, our Health Effects Officer, is going to lead that. We have other staff here. I know that are working on it too, but go ahead, Joe K.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So I'm going to get this presentation started. Go ahead and do next slide. Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right. Again, just for as a matter of review, here are some of the key elements of AB 617, which is a law that was passed last year. There are, it's actually quite broad-reaching. There are many different moving parts to it. Our agency is working very closely with CARB and implementing all of these components simultaneously, although they do have slightly different time schedules and requirements. I think the focus of my presentation today is really on the top 2 bubbles, the community air monitoring, community emission reduction plans. This is really one of the cornerstones of the AB 617 program because this is the one where we have to, or the California Air Resources Board has to designate specific communities in which to implement air monitoring monitoring and emission reduction plans. They actually did do that designation earlier this year, back in September. There are 10 communities designated for the first year, and 3 of those are within our district. The other pieces, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about those, but the ARB staff are developing a database to display the emissions data from facilities again across the state. We've been working on implementing the clean technology incentives and also doing our rulemaking to implement the best emission controls. Okay. However, I would mention that these are both either district-wide or statewide initiatives. Here are some of the key milestones set in the statute. So the first one has already passed. That was October 1st. So again, the ARB set the statewide strategy, including designated the 10 year one communities and also issued their guidelines and benchmarks. The next target that we're looking at is July 1st, 2019, which is the deadline for the air districts, such as ours, to deploy air monitoring in the year one communities that were designated for air monitoring. Soon after that, in late September 2019, is the deadline for our governing board to adopt the emissions reduction plans for each of these year one communities. And then further down the line, in December 2023, is the deadline for us to have implemented the BART. And again, we're pursuing that through rulemaking efforts. I'm just going to ask, my staff actually did present here at EJAG back in July, and I was just wondering how many of you guys remember that presentation, so I don't have to repeat a lot of how many. So, all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and take you guys down a brisk walk down memory lane, and here we are. Here's the outline of the process. So back in February through June, we conducted a very extensive series of community meetings, seeking community input on how we should be identifying and prioritizing communities within our district for this program. In July, after our governing board approved the recommendations, we provided the report to the ARB with the recommendations on the implementation schedule. So at that time, we had recommended 4 communities within our district, with one of them being the caveat is as funding resources allow. Unfortunately, at that time, we did not know we did not have a lot of information in terms of how much money we would be getting in order to be implementing this program. We do have a little bit more clarity on that at this point. In September, late September, CARB approved the 10 communities. Again, three of them, so 3 out of the 4 were approved by CARB. And currently, we have hosted 3 kickoff meetings, 1 for each of the 3 communities, and we are currently convening the community steering committees for each of the year 1 communities. Here was basically why we had to identify and prioritize communities for this program. Again, what this means is that these communities can get community air monitoring and or community emissions reduction plans, with, of course, ultimately the goal to achieve cleaner air locally in these communities. I would also mention that there is a significant workload to implement these programs in each of these communities, and for those of you who are familiar with the efforts that we've done in Paramount or previous efforts that we've done through the Clean Communities Plan, you certainly understand how time intensive and how much work it is to really implement these programs effectively. Okay. Just some fun photos from some of our outreach meetings. You can see we definitely had a lot of really great participation. We held meetings in certainly each of our 4 counties. We also participated in meetings hosted by others, including out in the Coachella Valley. Talked to students at universities. We spoke to business groups, industry groups. We spoke with folks at organizations. We also presented at our EJCP meetings as well. Okay. So this was a lot of the input that we received regarding community identification and prioritization. So these were some of the key concerns regarding air pollution sources. So a lot of concerns around diesel sources, oil production and processing facilities, different types of other types of facilities. There was a lot of discussion about proximity and land use factors, specifically concern about schools that were located near air pollution sources. People who were concerned about the cumulative effects of having many facilities clustered together and areas that have a lack of green spaces. And certainly there are a lot of population factors that were raised. A lot of folks asked us to focus on areas where we could have more impact in areas with high population density, looking at disadvantaged communities based on family income or communities of color, areas with limited access to healthcare services. There's also concern about asthma rates and cancer rates and certain types of population groups. And so we felt that we needed to use some technical data to help guide our decision making, and certainly with the concern about air pollution sources and multiple air pollution sources, we felt that the MATE study was a very good technical data source to use. Again, MATES has shown that diesel particulate matter accounts for 2/3 of the air toxics cancer risk in our basin. You can see the darker areas correspond to areas along the major transportation corridors. Another technical data source that we used for the community identification and prioritization was CalEnviroScreen. This is, of course, a statewide screening tool that looks at both different types of pollution, including air pollution, water contamination, hazardous waste sites, and so on. But it also looks at the impact on the nearby population. So it looks specifically at certain sensitive population groups that may be more sensitive to the health impacts of these different types of pollutants. And it also looks at a variety of social and economic factors such as poverty, unemployment rates, places where few people speak English as a primary language, and so on. So this was a very useful tool because it also helped address a lot of the concerns regarding the population factors and the other environmental factors that are not reflected in MATES. So finally, we felt that the one area that wasn't very well addressed was the concern about the proximity of schools to air pollution sources. So we actually developed our own metric regarding, which is a land use metric, looking at the location of schools to areas that were zoned for industrial use or any of the freeways. So this included schools as well as daycare centers. And we looked at a 1,000-foot buffer around each school. And you can see that the metric here is actually fairly scattered. This actually just shows the cutout of the 55 communities that were identified. Which is here. So basically the school metric is based only on the ones in these communities, although we did generate it for the entire district. So the distribution of this metric actually looks very different from MATES and CalEnviroScreen. Okay. So these were the 55 communities within our district that were considered for the AB 617 program. You can see this covers a very large proportion of the populated areas of our district. So we certainly understand that there's a lot of need, and clearly there's no way that we could do all 55 communities all at once. So we were definitely needed to prioritize. We went through the prioritization process in a systematic way. Again, starting with all 55 communities in step one, we felt that it was appropriate to separate by air basin because a lot of these factors and technical data that we might consider for communities in the South Coast Air Basin may not really apply very well to the Salton Sea Air Basin, in other words, in the Coachella Valley. And we wanted to make sure that the needs and the disadvantages of the folks in the Eastern Coachella Valley were considered uniquely. So within the South Coast Air Basin, we still had 54 communities that needed to go through the prioritization process. We applied various types of screening criteria based on CalEnviro Screen and Mates. If my memory serves, I believe we took the top 5% by CalEnviro Screen. And the top 50% for mates. Basically, that was an and criteria, meaning that we're looking for the communities that were most disadvantaged using a cumulative metric, which is CalEnviro Screen, but also wanted to make sure that we identified communities that had significant air pollution issues, and specifically local air pollution issues that we could address. So that left us with still about 30 some communities. So we had to evaluate additional factors. We looked at some other information that we had based on our previous monitoring studies. We looked at community interest and through their own community self-nominations. We certainly paid very close attention to what folks had to say about their own communities, because we do know that there are limitations to our technical data that we certainly don't are not necessarily able to capture everything with the technical data that we do have. After that evaluation of the additional factors, we still had, I think, 18 communities that needed to be prioritized. So we needed to trim down even further. And so finally, in order to distinguish the year 1 communities from the year 2 to 5 communities, we looked took a look back at our statutory deadlines and said, well, we have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. And so we looked for areas where we had a little bit of a head start based on some other work that we had already done. So based on the implementation of MATES 5, which includes a significant portion of the advanced monitoring projects in the ports area, especially near the refineries. We looked at some of the groundwork that we had done through the Clean Communities Plan and the engagement that we had done in the context that we had established through that. And so with that, we were able to trim it down to a more manageable number of communities to go in the first year. So here are the 3 communities approved by the California Air Resources Board for year 1. One community, this is in no particular order. This is Wilmington, West Long Beach, and Carson. Again, the ports area communities and home to several refineries. Actually, I'll talk more about it in the subsequent slides. Next one is the East LA community, Boyle Heights, East LA, and West Commerce, specifically the Bandini area. And the third one is an Inland Empire community, which is San Bernardino and Moscone. So first, Wilmington, West Long Beach, and Carson. This is a ports area community with several major refineries, an area that clearly has many socioeconomic burdens. We've done some work there previously with the FluxSense pilot study and other studies. We are currently conducting MATES 5 there, including a lot of the advanced monitoring projects, and we're working to implement Rule 1180, which is the refinery fence line and community monitoring rule. It scored obviously very high in MATES 4 and CalEnviro Screen scores. Again, an area that is very highly impacted by diesel PM. By very high, you mean it was the highest? It was the highest, 100th percentile. And we held our community kickoff meeting on October 2nd. It was very well attended. I think roughly 150, Fabian? Roughly on the order of 150 people attending that meeting. That's where we talked a little bit about the community steering committee, invited folks to submit interest forms. We received a lot of interest forms. I don't have an exact number, but there was a lot of interest for this community. And we will be holding our first steering committee meeting on October 30th. And in fact, we have sent out the notification emails to the folks we are inviting to participate on the community steering committee. We're just waiting for confirmations before we can post a roster. Okay. Next is East LA, Boyle Heights, and West Commerce. This is a community that is obviously east of downtown, has rail yards and major industrial areas, a lot of small facilities too, such as auto body shops and scrap yards and so on. Boyle Heights was the focus of one of our Clean Communities planned pilot projects. We certainly did a lot of good work there, but we do recognize that there's more work that can be done there and also in these neighboring areas. Again, very high MATES and CalEnviro screen scores. We held our community kickoff meeting a couple weeks ago, and we'll be holding our steering committee meeting at the end of November. This one, I will mention it now, actually. If you happen to know anybody who might be interested in participating in the community steering committee meeting, deadline is today, so please submit your interest forms. So, question?
Is there criteria for being on the steering committee? I mean, I know it could be like an organization, a leader, an affiliation, and geographic, anything that can help understand how to get somebody on there that's going to be valuable or, contributing? I'm gonna be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation, so I will address that. Thank you. So, okay, all right. Here's San Bernardino and Moscone communities. Again, this is Inland Empire community next to the major rail yard, that's BNSF, and some other industrial sources. So San Bernardino, of course, is the neighborhood focused around the rail yard, and then the community to the north is called Moscone, which is an unincorporated county area, certainly an area with a lot of poverty. If you drive around the neighborhood, you'll see a lot of dirt roads and so on. And that neighborhood is also bordered by a couple warehouses. It's not, I would say, it's not the major warehousing area of the Inland Empire, although there are some potential opportunities there with some warehousing facilities. This community scored a little bit lower in MATES. I think part of it is MATES is not going to give you the resolution in terms of the impacts of, for example, the rail yard to the communities that are immediately adjacent. But very, very high CalEnviro screen scores. I know we did a lot of work there through Loma Linda with a health assessment that was done. So we certainly know that there are a lot of air quality concerns and a lot of health-related concerns in this community. We did hold our kickoff meeting back on October 9th. I would say very well attended. Approximately 60 people came. Very engaged, very enthusiastic crowd. We are in the process of going through our interest forms and seeing who we can invite to our steering committee meeting, which is to be held on November 8th. Okay, so here is a little bit more about the Community Steering Committee. So the purpose of this committee is to help us identify and prioritize air pollution issues, specifically air pollution issues within each of these year one communities. Also, just to clarify, we are forming a steering committee for each of the three, so there'll be 3 steering committees. We are asking the steering committee to help guide strategies for community air monitoring and the emissions reduction plans, and to do that through providing input on the community definition. Some of our previous reports you may have seen. We have intentionally blurry maps without hard boundaries. There are specific reasons for that because we felt it really was not up to us to say, where the boundaries should be, and we definitely wanted the steering committee to weigh in on that aspect. And another reason is because we really wanted to avoid redlining as much as possible, and we wanted to make sure that we understood, what purpose this would serve and what it is and what it isn't. The steering committee would also help with developing approaches and assisting with community outreach. So we're definitely looking for folks who have really strong networks and I would also mention very diverse networks. So we certainly don't want a committee of all folks who have the same network, because that doesn't really help us get the word out. We're also asking the Community Steering Committee to help us track progress as the program progresses. As far as who is eligible, who should be part of it, who we're doing outreach to and inviting, we certainly are looking for active residents and community leaders, certainly looking for residents who reside in these communities. A wide variety of community organizations. It could be EJ organizations, could be other local community organizations. looking for representation from local business owners or workers and the relevant local agencies, in particular land use agencies, public health agencies, transportation agencies, and so on, as long as they serve those areas. I would also say that, if you take a look at our interest form, we do ask people to choose what category they would like to represent, and understanding that folks, in their personal lives do wear many hats. It is a question of who they choose to represent for the purpose of speaking on this particular steering committee. So that is what we ask. I can tell you a little bit more about what we've done for Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach in terms of the process of selecting excuse me, the steering committee members, since that's the first one to go. And I do want to mention that the process can look different for each of the different communities, because we felt that we are getting a very different set of interest forms for each community. So we do have to sort of tailor it to make sure that we don't just take what interest forms we got and go with it. We do want to make sure that we get a good balance of folks, and making sure that the folks that we are getting really are local and really are able to represent the local entities. Question?
Are you looking for a specific number of members for the committees?
I think previously we had said that we're looking for, more than 10 and less than 30, although as the case for Wilmington, I think we have a little bit over 30. So, yes.
So time commitments, I know it's once a month. You meet for 2 hours. And then after 7 months or something like that, I think you guys were going to go ahead and do all that stuff. And then it talks about communities representing alternates. And then the other question that I might have was, in subsequent years, how can someone participate and bring on new, rotate out?
So yeah, that's a great point. So we're asking for a 1-year commitment at this point. Of course, it would be fantastic if we had folks participate for the duration of the program, which is anticipated to be roughly about 5 years for each community, give or take. But we do understand that it is a pretty significant time commitment. We are looking at monthly meetings, although we are going to skip over the holiday season, so we won't have meetings in December, but then we'll be reconvening in January. And in addition to participating at the meetings, there might be materials that need to be reviewed between meetings, and also again the expectation to assist with helping us get the word out and doing that community outreach to make sure that that we are hearing from, we are really hearing from the community through those folks who are represented on the committee, and that the work that we're doing and any engagement that needs to be done can get out to the community as well.
And so the meetings are during the day, weekday, weeknight.
So the first ones that are scheduled are in the evening from 6 to 8 p.m. But we did have a request to vary the times of the meetings if possible, so that different groups can participate. Because we do understand that evenings may work better for some people and daytime might work better for others. I would also say that we are going to try to have somewhat of a fixed schedule, so that it's a little bit more predictable, and then people can kind of mark it on their calendars, so that we're looking at, like, for example, one community could have second Wednesday of each month, and then and then we can vary the daytime and evening. Also, because some of our communities are pretty large, Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach, we would probably try to find maybe like 3 locations, one in each of the jurisdictions, to allow people to participate a little bit more easily. So we do want to kind of vary it a little bit, but not so much that people would get confused. Okay, so did that answer your question? We can certainly get that to you. It's on our website, but we can get you. You want the link or paper? Okay, okay. I would also mention that for the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach, we did get a lot of residents who were interested in participating as residents, and what we did was we had we had interest forms from each of the three chambers of commerce, and then we had interest forms from a number of community leaders, community organizations, and so we asked each of the three chambers of commerce and three of our environmental justice leaders in that community to help us by recommending which folks among the stack of interest forms from residents they would recommend. We were looking for 12 residents, four from Carson, 4 from Wilmington, 4 from West Long Beach, and we asked them to recommend residents from each of those areas. So we did take those recommendations, and that really helped us select which residents would be part of this committee. We are also again allowing each member to designate an alternate. And the alternate would also need to submit an interest form to us. For example, we had multiple interest forms from the same community organization. We asked them. It's like, okay, we'll just discuss among the three of you guys who wants to be the primary, who wants to be the alternate. So. Okay. All right. Oh, yes, question.
I'm interested in the Moscone area, but I noticed the deadline was October 19th for the interest.
So right now we have 0 interest forms from residents from Moscone. So if you're interested, we are extending the deadline. So
You still accept them?
yes.
Okay.
So did you say the representatives from the chambers were going to identify the other members in each of the respective areas?
So it was the 3 representatives from this is just for the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach area. So those each of the 3 chambers of commerce and then 3 environmental justice leaders. So this panel of 6.
Would be making recommendations for
Correct.
other
They made the recommendations just for the residents.
for the residents.
For the residents,
okay.
just because, I mean, it's really hard for us to know, this resident versus that resident. I mean, some folks, wrote up a really nice, explanation on their interest form. Some folks provided very little information, but we figured that this panel, would know their community better than we do. So again, here are the deadlines. Again, the deadline for Wilmington, West Long Beach, and Carson, we actually had to hold quite fast to that because we did have so much interest. I would mention that, however, that for the agencies who really need to be at the table, they need to be there. So that it certainly kind of matters a little bit less for the agencies. And I do recognize that we work in this bureaucracy, and I know how long it takes to get things through the chain. I suspect it's probably the same way for other agencies as well. But we are in the process of getting the confirmations from the various folks for the Wilmington, West Long Beach, and Carson steering committee. We are looking through our list for San Bernardino and Moscone and trying to get some more folks in the areas where we're lacking. So I think we have a lot of community organizations, but we don't have we don't have a lot of local businesses, to be perfectly honest. We don't have a lot of local businesses. We have a lot of San Bernardino residents. We have no Moscone residents right now. So, and then for East LA, Boyle Heights, and West Commerce, again, we are still doing some outreach to make sure that we get some folks to submit their interest forms. Next steps, we'll be convening the steering committee, so certainly invite you guys to join us down in Wilmington on Tuesday. baseball? What baseball? We will have we will be presenting some of the technical analysis in support of the community plans, and also kind of giving folks a little bit of a air quality 101, air quality planning, sort of what we do, and how it mirrors the process that we see moving forward in AB 617. And then we'll be working closely with the steering committees through October of next year to identify the priorities and the strategies that will be written into these plans. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we had some questions during. Did anyone have any other things to ask? Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
So just a little bit more clarification on the process that was used in order to maybe do outreach for the steering committees, aside from maybe anybody that attended the actual community meeting, what other kind of outreach has been done?
So I think part of so certainly there was a lot of outreach around the meeting, and even for folks who weren't able to attend the meeting, we tried to get make sure that they got the information. We are doing some reminder. We have mailing lists because we've done many communities in the many meetings in these communities, and we send email blasts to remind them, like, hey, the deadline's coming up. You can still submit an interest form. So we have been doing that. We're also just making calls to folks that we know to say, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested? We've gotten some feedback from some folks from either elected officials' offices or other government agencies, for example, like, oh, here are a couple people who I think might be good for the steering committee. So, yeah.
Great. Other questions? David, I guess you just go to AB 617, aqmd.gov/AB 617. You can find that form there. There you go. Okay. I've got some questions. I think in terms of the milestones and deadlines and stuff, there's also one January 1st that says we have to establish a best available retrofit control technology schedule by then. And so we expect that to be on the board agenda in December. And that will lay out how we're going to get there by 2023, which is an incredibly aggressive deadline. And it will be certainly challenging. I know that's not your department. You don't have to worry about it, but a few of the other folks around here will have to. My question too is, are we going to, for our advisory groups, we provide people a per diem. If you're not applying for your per diem, please apply for your per diem and don't miss out on it. Are we going to give a per diem to steering committee members?
So for now, that wasn't part of the plan, but I guess we can remain open to it if that's something that is
We probably,
asked for.
I mean, if we want community members to participate regularly, it might help to get them there and compensate them for the time. I know we'll be getting a lot more value out of them than the per diem provides, but we might think about that. You also didn't mention the fact that all of this is captured under the Air Resources Board and the Air Resources Board guidelines. So they have both a blueprint, a strategy for how to do AB. They see this rolling out, and then they have specific guidelines for this in terms of what the steering group should look like and all of that. So we're being very deferential to what the Air Resources Board is recommending with regard to this, because they're paying for it and the legislature has appropriated the money to them, which then comes to us. So we need to make sure that this works as seamlessly as possible, because we're kind of the implementation group on this, and the Air Resources Board is kind of in charge in a lot of ways. And they've got are putting together a really big team of staff members, as are we, in terms of getting this done. I think I did have one other question, and I know it's not maybe someone else can answer it, because it's not an area in which you work, but one of the other things that you didn't talk about, it was one of the key provisions, had to do with emission inventories. And I know that at least I've heard indirectly through the conversation at Air Resources Board and other people who've been attending these meetings, that we've had some issues with what the Air Resources Board is proposing with regard to their regulation on emissions reporting. So if staff is here, who can address that? Anyone? Jill? You're welcome to come up. I don't know what the issues are. I'm just curious because whole new program, well, Jill, you can talk about what we do already, what's being proposed, and how we feel about it.
Hello, I'm Jill Wynot. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at South Coast SCAQMD, so I know a little bit about all the different moving pieces that are going on with this program. I think it's an exaggeration to say that we have major concerns with what ARB is doing in this area.
Good to know, because what I'm hearing is we're the biggest impediment to this regulation getting adopted. I swear, that's what several people have told me.
I'd like to talk to you afterwards to hear who
Okay.
you're talking to, but that's another story. So basically, at South Coast AQMD, you may be aware that we have several programs that get inventory information from specific facilities. We have our annual emissions reporting program, where I think it's about 2,000 of the larger emitters for any of the criteria pollutants and certain toxics. Every year they do an inventory and let us know how much nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, et cetera, that they report. And from the stationary sources, those subset is probably 90+% of the emissions, because it's kind of the 80-20 rule. The largest ones emit the most. And then for the other sources that don't directly report in their emissions, we have other ways of estimating the emissions from dry cleaners, gas stations, some of the smaller ones, without burdening them with reporting directly to us every year. We also have the Toxics Hotspots, or AB 2588 program, where certain facilities, whether or not they report through the annual emissions reporting, they have to do a comprehensive report of hundreds of air toxics, and then they may do risk reduction, public notice, and other things there. So we get that kind of toxics inventory as well. Joe Kay also mentioned the MATES study, where we go out and actually measure many air toxics throughout the basin every 5 to 10 years. And so we have a really good picture of what the impacts are on a pretty small geographic level from the overall toxics. So that's sort of what we do now. There's always room for improvement. What the state is required to do under the statute related to AB 617 is that there's supposed to be a uniform system of emissions reporting through the state for all of the facilities that are in their cap and trade program for greenhouse gases. So it's a smaller subset than all of the state, but it's your major emitters. It's your power plants, your gas stations, your major industrial sources. Where we have a little bit of a philosophical difference with ARB is that they're trying to go way beyond the statutory authority and do annual emission reports from a lot more facilities than just the ones in the cap and trade. Not a bad idea, but what they're suggesting in their draft regulation is that if you have one of these AB 617 communities, that any facility that has a district permit has to report their emissions every year. It sounds really good philosophically, but in practical terms, it's getting to all those really small facilities that have never reported their emissions. They don't know how to do it. It would triple our workload for the number of facilities that are reporting directly for about 1 or 2% more specific inventory information. And so we're trying to work with ARB to say that doesn't sound like a good starting point. We have 3 communities, and they're very large geographically. Some of the other areas, like San Diego, they have Barrio Logan, which is a relatively small geographic footprint. So for them, it might be easy. The other important distinction is that in the South Coast, we have very low levels for how big of equipment needs to be before it requires a permit. So for us, a little engine that's 51 horsepower gets a permit. Other parts in the state that are going to have these AB 617 communities, they may not require a permit for something 10 times that size. So it's unlevel playing field, and also sort of a lot more work. We'd rather not have to hire 4 staff people to do that inventory work. We'd rather have that money to take those 4 people to write the rules, to do the community plans, to do the outreach, to do the sampling. So that's sort of what we're trying to work out with CARB. And I wouldn't say we are strongly oppose, but we're just trying to make some common sense into the regulation.
So just speaking along those lines, I know for the smaller engines, the state is moving over towards state certification on those smaller, engines and all that other stuff, portables, that kind of thing, that get reported and whatnot. So, I see the unification and the streamlining of the permit process, especially for the smaller engines that you were speaking of. But the concern in a lot of these communities, specifically the Boyle Heights East LA community, is I'm finding that, when I go into and look at certain facilities that I feel that are large enough that should be reporting, that are constant emitters, and I don't find that source testing information. I don't find that accurate annual emissions reports. Those are the things that we need to capture. And the only way to fairly do that is to cast a wide net. Now, whether we come back in terms of enforcement and really hounding like the really small fish, I think with that regulation is to capture those mid-level people or even those larger people that have been grandfathered into permitting and all that stuff. And so those are the type of industries that we in the community are faced with that need that type of reporting in order to even identify what sources of types of toxins we're being exposed to and stuff. Like for instance, for years, I'm sorry to keep harping on the great example of the Exide and all that other stuff, but the benzene emissions, it's right now I was looking on the CDC website in terms of environmental exposures and symptoms that are rapidly they're finding more and more cases of throughout the entire country, but it's on the rise and it's unknown, but they feel that it's an environmental factor. It's not like a genetic and hereditary, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, the way our medical system is with HIPAA and all that stuff, we're unable to get that really good granular information in order to identify those communities where you have asthma and then respiratory issues and all that other stuff. So again, all that needs to be taken into consideration as well. And perhaps, there's a common ground that could be had there.
And I think one of the other messages that we talked to CARB about is that they're predisposing what the communities want. And so when we go through this process, some communities may want more detailed emissions inventory from certain sources or certain types of industries, and we can certainly pursue that either by changing our rules or going through different processes. But for the vast majority of these communities, and I think they talked about it earlier, the mobile sources are really what dominates the risk. There may be some pockets of industrial where a specific facility is impacting their neighbors, but the amount of work to the amount of information gain. So we're trying to find a good balance there. And I think we'll work that out. And then we'll work with the communities, and regardless what CARB requires or our rules require, we'll hear from the community what are their concerns and then think about what's the best way that we can handle those.
David, you had a comment?
I think Raphael wanted to follow up. Or is it, I can't read your name.
Yes. Yeah. Raphael.
My eyes aren't as good as they used to be.
I just call him Rafi.
Just really quick as a follow-up. Thank you. Speaking of the mobile source emissions and then the CARB-related items, with respect to the steering committee specifically, because of course we have a nice 50-50 mix of constant polluters, including the tri-freeways area and all that stuff. Are the steering committees going to be exposed to CARB-related issues and be able to input in and have some sort of say in recommendations in, recommending something for those mobile sources? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So the efforts are are certainly led by the districts, although CARB staff are definitely participating and definitely engaged on these topics. The emissions reduction plans can include measures for mobile sources. It could still be district efforts if we're pursuing through incentive-based programs, for example, or rulemaking where we have that authority, but where in areas where it falls under ARB authority, for example, for some of the mobile source enforcement efforts, they would be written into that part of the SERP. So.
Okay, David and then Jill.
So I think I understand what the Resources Board is looking for in terms of a cumulative picture, and that would be the ask. And it sounds like you've said that you're going to work with them. So I'm assuming you guys are going to talk about thresholds, meaning there's a lot of smaller type businesses that you mentioned, and I don't know how small they are, but if there's 20 small ones and one large one, and then you could do the numbers and know, okay, well, 20 equals one large or medium, that's fine. And I think that's important to look at. So the pushback, I accept that you're pushing back on what they're asking, but I would hope that someone would say, well, let's create a threshold that we can actually, negotiate, this is too small, this is just right, and then go from there.
Dr. Johnston?
That's exactly what we're working on. Yep, thank you.
So this is a little bit of a broader comment. I was at a training a week or two ago with CARB staff around 617. And one thing that really struck me with their description of the process was around, how a lot of these key decisions around looking at air monitoring and emissions reductions is supposed to come out of the Community Steering Committee. And, that there's some really great aspects to that. But then I asked them about, what sort of materials do they have, are they going to develop that can really help, make sure that the participants on the CSC really understand, what are the different kinds of monitors out there, what can they measure, what can this emissions reduction technology do, and there's some like super knowledgeable people, out there participating in this process, and they told me, well, we don't have anything. And they had no plans to develop anything, which then struck me as like, okay, well we're going to really be coming into a very unequal playing field. If you have industry or regulators in the room with the community, it'll just be really easy to talk past each other because all these issues are going to get really technical really fast. And so I just think that's a really important point to consider. The community is great on engaging members and discussing the importance of air pollution. But I think really to get like really effective plans, then people need to understand, what can we monitor for, what is it measuring, and how can we take actions on that? And even some of these basic things like active monitors, passive monitors, particulate-based pollution versus gas-based pollution. Like when I've been out in the community, like I realize like it's a lot to throw out there all at once when you try to go from what people's concerns are to how we can translate that into an effective monitoring program and emissions reduction plan. I don't know, so I think it's important if it's not coming from CARB to think about how here, and particularly since these are, EJ communities, can really make sure that we can build that capacity and that, technical expertise from within the community to be able to have these conversations and make sure this is really effective.
I'm assuming that these meetings are going to have to be public meetings, notified Brown Act things. But public.
Public, but not Brown Act, yes.
They're not advisory groups or steering committees. It seems like they would have. Anyway, I'll let the attorneys figure that out. Right, Nancy? But that's a really good point. And I think in the past, we have made an effort to make sure that communities had some technical assistance in some of this. I know like when many years ago, we did a really complicated, it's actually before I was on the governing board, we did a complicated hexchrome regulation. And we hired a consultant to work with Communities for Better Environment and other EJ groups to provide them with some advice on what their comments might be on the process. And I remember Bahram Fazeli from CBE was telling me how helpful that was. If there was a way for staff or for some other consultant to kind of make sure that the communities are up to speed on this stuff as best they can be, because I've spent decades doing it and still complicated. I mean, just last Friday, I was able to tell staff about a methane-eating bug that creates plastic that they weren't aware of that might help in one of our regulations, and they've done it for more decades than I have. And there's so much information out there, and especially with new technologies evolving every day, and we know that fortunately some of these mobile source emission technology, battery electric, fuel cell, near zero emission technologies are evolving very, very quickly. And we're finding out about new things every day. In fact, my staff at Coalition for Clean Air just told me about how did they characterize it? It's it's like for cities and counties, it's a basic vehicle that you can sort of put together like Legos if you want it to be a street sweeper or or I forget what it's. I'd have to look at my notes, but it was modular, and you can make it into whatever you needed it for, like a bucket truck or a street sweeper or whatever it was. So there's some company out there that is like, and it was battery electric zero emission, and so they were really impressed when they saw that. So there's this, and before last week, no one knew about it that I know of. So there's just so much to catch up on. And the modern technology, that's complicated stuff. It really is to understand. So I think that's a really, really good suggestion to do. The other thing, too, with the inventory stuff, Jill, I think the communities are most concerned about what we don't know about. Maybe some of it we know we don't know, and maybe some of it we don't know that we don't know, because there are so many examples, hex chrome, for example, that there were a lot of things we didn't know, and now we know that we don't know, and we're, trying to adopt a rule to get us more information about it. So I think, focusing on TACs, the toxic air contaminants, because that's what they're really concerned about. And that possible sources that we might not know about. And it's a little bit hard to know what you don't know until you go out and measure it. And that's, I think, where the concern is, because we have been surprised on several times to find toxic air contaminant emission problems where we didn't suspect them. And so there's got to be a way to provide communities that assurance that we are finding things that may be a problem in their community, especially these high cumulative impact communities that already have huge burdens, and not doing it just for the sake of putting additional burdens on mom and pop sources. So there is a balance, I think.
That's a really good point. And I think one of the things that we will not learn it from an inventory, because if we don't know it, they don't know it, and so it won't come that way. But one of the things that we're going to be doing in these communities is some mobile monitoring.
Yeah.
So we will have vehicles equipped with different kinds of real-time and some sampling equipment to go out and just kind of drive the streets, and they'll pick up metals and other contaminants that are toxics. So that will help us identify where there are spikes, where there are things we don't know, and then that can help direct other monitoring efforts. So that's what we're saying, that there's other ways of doing that other than hundreds or thousands more inventory sources. And I wanted to add, you were asking about the capacity building pretty much for the communities. ARB has been given out, or they gave out $10 million worth of grants to organizations throughout the state, some of which are in AB 617 communities, some are which in communities that may be in this program in the next year or future years, and there's an additional $10 million. And so through that grant solicitation process, there may be a way to get some of these communities and others some kind of help like that.
But that's not the
for
purpose
technical.
of those grants. I mean, because
It's
Coalition for
capacity
Clean
building.
Air got one for Maywood to work with Committee Pro Uno to do that, but that's it's more toward identifying pollutants and coming up with plans on how to reduce them, and less about capacity. I mean, it's not specifically. I mean, some of it is in terms of outreach, but it's not specific. Our grant includes a lot of things, including a lot of monitoring. It does include community outreach, but it was more focused on what the monitoring program is about And I'm not sure. Yeah, we should think about that. It might be one good way of doing it. And I'm hoping that the legislature will continue to appropriate the money so that ARB can continue to do these programs. Because you're right, it could help educate them, but I don't know that they're specifically geared toward what we're talking about here. Anyway, it's an interesting point. Rafa, you had another comment?
So actually, I do want to weigh in before we move on to another topic. So I think, Jill, you had a really, really great point, and I do agree that there is certainly a lot of technical information that needs to be conveyed appropriately, so that folks can be on a more kind of level playing field there. I think we have tried to do that, and in some capacity, starting with our kickoff meetings, we do use do presentations in an open house format, and we found that that's been very effective in getting folks to to ask a variety of questions, being able to have conversations with people rather than just a pure Q&A, and your blue card is done and your time's up. We've been starting that. I do know that the process takes a long time, but I also do know that we have these deadlines in statute, and so we're trying to really work that out and balance that workload there. As far as some of these other elements, like kind of the air pollution basics, again, we do a lot of that outreach generally through a number of our programs, and we are trying to do that at the steering committee meetings, although, we have a really packed agenda. And so we're presenting kind of like Air Quality 101, air quality planning basics, and then, we are starting to present some of the existing data in terms of what do we know in terms of emission sources in these communities, and what these pie charts look like. So, it is, I do understand that it's technical data. We do try to communicate in plain language as much as we can. There's always room for improvement, and we would certainly look to you to help us with that as well.
So maybe to Dr. Liu's point in terms of like the technology and all that other stuff, and how, someone made a comment about how technology is just going to get really technical really fast. The way I've approached learning about new technologies and really getting into air quality, I mean, this is a field that, I don't know, 10 years ago now, when I, first was dragged into this, I didn't know much, being a mechanical engineer and civil and now environmental, while I have a really broad, background to really thrust me into all this stuff, especially with, when it comes to scrubbers and all that other stuff. My approach was little by little. First, really understanding the source, and that's why I'm really, continuing to hammer on source testing, and finding ways in order to get the little guys or the medium-sized guys that have fallen under the radar, that have been grandfathered in. It's one thing to address the rules, it's the other thing to get these guys engaged, and really caring about, what's going on in this community and what's going on immediately on their rooftop or in their own backyard. And one of the things that perhaps I could suggest is, finding grants that would allow the district to help them with their source testing, whether that be through AQMD's labs or another state agency lab that is approved with the various testing requirements or whatever, but assist the company in, when the inspectors go out to do their inspections and whatnot, when they discover these type of companies, they could, go out and do the bag testing as well. Just literally take a vacuum bag and pull a sample, or at least, have staff go out, pull the sample, do the source testing, maybe at a greatly subsidized cost that, some of these grant monies can offset. That way we know now and they know what type of emission technologies they're going to need. And then as the steering committees come and are presented with the various information in terms of, okay, these are the constituents that they're finding in high concentrations in your area. Let's have expert ABC, who's a chemical engineer, can come down and at least have 3 or 4, proven technologies that are used to break these things down into, and learn how things are broken down. So for instance, when we were looking at the presentation on diesel particulates and these after emission control technologies, the presentation was very informative, even though it was slightly on the technical side, talking about how PM emissions come out of the diesel engines, goes through a catalytic converter of sorts, and a urea fluid is injected in order to burn, increase the temperatures, break the thing apart, and that's how you ultimately get your NOx emissions down, your PM gets burned off, and that was helpful when understanding, okay, this is the technology, this is the things that you have to worry about. And then when you have community input, well, at least the businesses come in and some of the steering committee understand that technology, they won't be afraid of that technology because at that point they'll look at, from an operations and maintenance standpoint, oh, okay, so it's just this increase in fluids, this amount of change out, this is how. So I've gone and literally researched the O&M factor in that so that I could speak to people's that the companies that are around that are afraid to have to convert their technology over to this. Then I could speak, because in the city, that's what I was literally feeding information to. I was literally writing the emergency standby diesel. I mean, I was the go-to guy in the city because of the presentations, because of the continued research and stuff that I was doing. And now we're moving into full electric sewer cleaning and catch basin cleaning equipment. Right now we're 100% natural gas powered, but we're moving into the even greener, electric. And we're really looking into that. So you'd be surprised if you feed a little information, how much more will trickle out.
Yeah, thank you. David, do you have another comment?
Yes, I was going to jump on what Jill said regarding the capacity of the people that participate. I mean, it's always a learning curve, and we've brought people in, and when they hear the businesses and other groups speaking in language that they don't understand, they feel disenfranchised and or just put off in the whole process and are likely not to reattend. So then I thought, well, how do we doing that? We're doing a survey recently, and someone presented, and they're, we're going to do it all social media. And I said, well, not everybody has social media. But then you realize everybody has one of these. I mean, I don't care how broke you are. You've got a $1,500 phone. I'm being sarcastic, but most people have a phone, and most people go to that for all of their information. You gather information from the news, television, reading, whatever. So then I thought, well, how, in terms of breaking down information in smaller bits, how could you guys do that? Now, do you have a marketing section or a media section? I mean, I know you guys are big on the web, and you go to your website and et cetera, et cetera. But
It's called public affairs.
Yeah, it's public affairs. I mean, in my tiny brain, I would say, if you're going to try and educate people, maybe you use the social media platform, Instagram, Snapchat, do small little bit lectures on information. Just get somebody's face on there, say, hey, did you know about this? This is what this is. This is how diesel breaks down. This is how ozone converts. This is what you're doing. Small bits and chunks that if in fact you had these people in this interest, I was looking at the interest form online, and you asked them, hey, do you have an Instagram account? Do you have and some of the leaders do. I mean, I'm old and I have one for my office, but you know,
I'm
I
with
don't
you
have.
there.
I'll show you how to set one up.
Yeah, I have not personal, you know, but I'm just saying there's probably some leaders, some grassroots organization people, some folks that have some followers that if they put some information out about air quality,
Yep.
they'd get 20, 30 likes or, you know, and that is, and if they look at it or read it or hear a small talk with somebody friendly speaking plain English, you might get a lot more ground. And then come back in, I put that on my Instagram feed, come to steering committee, I got 400 likes. The information is getting out there. You can kind of quantify what you're doing.
Yeah, I have Instagram just to keep track of what my kids are up to. But I totally agree, and I think that, you know, what Jill brought up was when she asked ARB, do you have it? Are you going to do it? And they said no. I mean, maybe it's up to us. You know, maybe we need to do air quality monitoring 101 in a bunch of different formats.
Yep.
And maybe we need to do air pollution control in a bunch of different formats, 101, and kind of put it together. Now, I don't think it's necessarily going to be easy. Jill, can you remember, I think you participated in this with Barry, right? I mean, when we did the ARB EJ Stakeholders Group, you did those, right? We were doing that together about 15 years ago or more. And we had a group a little bigger than this. And we tried to come up with a public participation guidebook for people, or environmental justice advocates. And I added up the experience in the room, and it was well over 300 years of air quality experience in the room. I believe it took us 9 months to come up with a guidebook just to explain which agencies were responsible for what, and how the laws and regulations worked, and where your opportunities for participating in the process were. This is kind of the most simple thing that we deal with, but it's so extraordinarily complicated. We met like every month for 9 months to even get there. You remember that?
I do.
So this might not be as easy as it sounds, but I think it's worth it because people still relied upon that guidebook. I still send it to people, and it's pretty much still accurate on how things are structured. So if we could do what Jill suggested to ARB, and it would be helpful in a lot of different venues, not just this 617 implementation, but it would be really great. And we've got the expertise. I mean, you know, you could do interviews with Andrea Polidori about air quality monitoring. You know, I mean, it's just there's a lot of ways to do it that might not be so
We are
resource intensive.
actually looking at a lot of different ways to get this out, and some of the early AB 617 meetings, people gave us some really good ideas about how we can broadcast the meetings using Periscope or other things on phones that I'm too old to mess with too, but we can do that. But one of the things that we're working on that I'm actually really excited about is some video shorts on a variety of topics. And so we can have a 1 minute or 5 minute video, whatever it takes, on this is what air pollution is. These are what you can monitor with. These are, you know, all kinds of different topics. And we have the in-house ability to produce those. And I think that that's one of the things that would really help this and all the processes. And ARB can use what we produce, and we certainly will share it with the other air districts and vice versa. So we're all kind of learning from what we're doing. But there's a lot of different things we can do relatively inexpensively, relatively quickly, that people could refer to. Oh yeah, let me go back and do a refresher of this 2-minute video. What is a particulate monitor, or why can't I do instant hex chrome monitoring with one of those low-cost sensors? They don't exist.
And then we'll all critique them and tell you how you could have done it better.
And one of the things, and when you talked about the outreach money that was available possibly, you know, personally, I would say maybe put some of that money in the hands of folks that could do some of this production on a smaller scale for you, and do it in a way that isn't like, here's a person in a studio in a room in some AQMD office versus somebody walking down the street past a polluter and talking about it. And it brings the more street credibility and I'm going to watch this video as opposed to someone in a suit.
Okay, here's the one I want to do, because heavy-duty diesel trucks don't have a smog check program. So all of us who drive regular vehicles and have to pay for smog check every couple of years when your vehicle gets old enough, you know, we take our vehicle in. This is the video I've been thinking about. You're interviewing someone who just got their paid. How much does it cost to get smog check done? About $75, right? 50, $75. Just paid $50, $75 to get their smog check certificate and you're interviewing them. It's like, how did it go? Did you pass? How much did you pay? And then you point to a heavy duty diesel truck driving down the road. You say, you know, that guy doesn't have to do that. Anyway, that's the video. That's the video I want to see. Okay. Do we have any other comments from members of the advisory group? Any members of the public? Oh, come on, Nicole. You don't have anything to say? Okay. Great. Then thank you so much, Joe Kay, Jill, and everyone for that update. A lot of good information there. I think we're going to get through the meeting pretty quickly today. We've got a couple more agenda items, but one more substantive one. I think we'll just go right through if everyone can do that. And it's related. I mean, in terms of the 4th annual EJ conference update, some of us were there. Well, I was there for the morning for a little bit of it. But Alicia, you're going to lead us through that?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll give you a brief overview of our 4th annual Environmental Justice Conference. Just a little bit of background. In 2015, the Environmental Justice Community Partnership was launched. And so that was really built to strengthen and build upon AQMD's relationships with communities, stakeholders, community organizations, and so forth. And one of those annual events that we have to do is the conference. And it was on September 26th at the Huffington Center at the St. Sophia Cathedral in Los Angeles. It was a half-day conference, and we had about 250 attendees. As folks walked in, we had 4 electric vehicles with information on incentive programs like Replace Your Ride. And it was also live streamed. So if you are interested after the presentation in seeing the event, you can find it through our calendar. We had Estelle Reyes as the MC. She's with Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. She did a fantastic job. She kept the event going, and we got a lot of compliments on her. Our keynote was Angela Johnson-Massaros, and her keynote address, just to kind of put it together, was on her experience in working with environmental justice communities, becoming an attorney, and what she has found and how we all can play a small role and a part in working with EJ and cleaning up our air. So during the event, there were 3 breakout sessions that you had the opportunity to choose from, and the first one was Closing the Digital Divide, an Inclusive Workforce in Green Technology. And really, this workshop just focused on the challenges in workforce development and expanding skill sets to navigate the rapidly changing workforce. And we had Michael Kadish from Great Alternatives moderate it. And we also had folks from Jobs to Move America, Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, Homeboy Electronics Recycling, and LA Clean Tech Incubator. The second breakout session was on air pollution and health effects. We had our very own Dr. Beeson participate on that panel that day. And it was led by Nancy Danella from the IQ Air Foundation. We also had Breathe Los Angeles, Safe Routes to School, and someone from South Coast AQMD. Our third breakout session was on making data and resources available for all. And this was mostly focused on how can we make more resources available. And as we were talking about earlier, one of the topics that was brought up was mobile apps. What can we do to really promote this more and make data available through that realm? We had Ron Moskowitz from South Coast AQMD moderate, and we had someone from CARB, Coalition for Clean Air, Valley Clean Air Now, and South Coast AQMD. The plenary session focused on green transportation and beyond. And so really we focused on mobile source air pollution and clean transportation technologies. And also I think they touched upon incentive programs as well. It was moderated by Wayne Astry, and some of the panelists included the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, Center for Sustainability Solutions, which is at USC, SoCal Gas Company, LA Metro, and BYD. So another aspect that we had heard in the past from surveys was that they really wanted some sort of way to keep in touch with other participants and network. So we essentially launched for the first time we partnered with the Whova app. So you're able to keep in contact with folks from the conference. Also have access to presentations, materials that were presented that day, including the agenda, and you have the ability to reach out to other participants. So that was a success. We had over 100 photos shared and posts that went up that day. And so if you are interested, our hashtag was #EJ Conference. So if you look that up, you can find past EJ conferences, including the one we just had. So this event was done through a partnership with all of the panelists and moderators and everyone that attended. So we're hoping to make next year's is even better. We're already planning 2019, so if you have any ideas, please let me know. We're interested in hearing.
Great. Questions, anyone? No? None? Greta?
Not a question, just kudos to staff. It was an excellent conference and well-planned and organized. I'm just torn when workshops are provided at the same time, and I found myself trying to get in on one of two. So, but otherwise, the panels and the plenaries were excellent. Thank you for putting that on.
Great. Carrie has a
Thank
question
you.
or comment next to you.
Thank you. In attending many conferences and seminars and all different kinds of things with regard to cap and trade and the implementation of cap and trade and all of the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent, I'm really curious if there's been any impact reports done to show that out of the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent, X amount of greenhouse gas emissions have been deterred. Something along those lines would be really interesting to me at a future conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ARB program, and I don't know if they're reporting that. You know?
I do not, but I can certainly ask and also just jot that down as we're planning and keeping that in mind. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? We really have no members of the public here, do we? No. Okay. All right, great. Is there any other business under item number 6? Retta, you have something else?
Actually, I did. During the Q&A, there was a couple of people that brought up concerns related to a proposed rule having to do with MHF.
Modified hydrofluoric acid.
Yes, and I was wondering if it's possible to get somebody to come, staff, or to discuss the proposed rule. It affects a particular community in the South Bay, or have somebody talk about the proposed rule, or someone from the
Depending upon
community.
the release scenario, it could affect quite a few people.
Yeah.
Not only, there's 2 refineries that use modified hydrofluoric acid, the Torrance Refinery and the Valero Refinery in Wilmington. It's something we've been spending enormous amount of time on the refinery committee on, but if you're interested, I think we could certainly have a presentation about it.
From both staff and maybe somebody from the community that could, I got a card from somebody at the conference, so.
Yeah. Danny?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the AQMD staff. We've been talking about some of the problems in South Colton, especially with the cement plant there. I know that there's been reports that AQMD didn't find anything there. The cement company says they're mitigating to keep the dust down, but the residents there still complain that the dust still gets on their cars, on their homes, and everything. And Nicole coordinated a meeting there. I think she clarified it was in August, and quite a few of the local officials were there. I wasn't able to attend, but I understand it was a very good meeting. So I really want to thank the AQMD staff for holding these meetings, you know, where there's a deep concern about the air quality. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I mean, I'm looking up the email I got from Nicole as a follow-up to that. And there was a meeting, there's been a lot of complaints, but they were issued 2 notices of violation in September 2017 for fugitive dust emissions. And when I asked staff about this, and they also said there was a preliminary meeting scheduled for November 3rd. Is that still happening? Do you know?
It's November 15th. It's already,
November
it is scheduled for, so we'll be back out there on November the 15th. We'll get you a flyer. We'll send a flyer out to the old potty. Okay.
Great. That's good to know. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Sure. Don.
It seems like that dust particulates have increased because it seems like everybody's blowing grass, you know, yard blowers. Seems like that is one of the major contributors that I've experienced personally myself. It's like,
Yeah, there's a couple issues there. There's the fact that a lot of those blowers are 2-stroke engines that pollute quite a bit, and then they knock a lot of stuff into the air. I don't know who we have on staff who has been dealing with that. I mean, certainly we've been incentivizing the development of electric leaf blowers. I like the zero emission ones, the brooms, but I can't convince staff that that's the best available control technology. So I don't, I really don't know. Jill, do you know who? Yeah, so if they have anything available, we should
We
maybe
can have that next meeting
share
also.
with
Yes.
Don, or just distribute it between meetings. I think would be fine too. Rafa?
Comment. So, you know, because it really upsets me when I see, like, you know, a lot of these gardeners and stuff literally just blowing everything out in the street and off like people's sidewalks, you know, businesses, that kind of stuff. And they just don't realize the type of emissions and particulates that they're literally stirring up, from, you know, brake dust to, you know, PM emissions and all that other stuff. But aside from that, you know, the thing that really just irks me is they're blowing a lot of that stuff into the, like, storm drain catch basins and stuff, and then ultimately all that emission, toxic pollutants, and all that other stuff gets out to the ocean, and, you know, we're having to deal with it on the city side. But who enforces that? I mean, I think, you know, maybe as a suggestion, I know there's a lot of interagency meetings and whatnot that take place on various topics and whatnot. Perhaps that could be discussed in an interagency meeting with various, you know, city officials and that kind of stuff, just so that way their code compliance people can just kind of, you know, watch out for that. It's like when we were needing to conserve water, we had water police, or at least, you know, agency staff, you know, from the various water companies and stuff. Kind of keep an eye out for that. Maybe we could recommend that.
The city of Los Angeles adopted an ordinance at one time to limit the use of leaf blowers. It was more of a noise issue than a pollution issue. But I don't know of anyone who's banned them. But maybe that I don't know what the state of it is. It's well. And where? In Coachella? Has actually banned them. Yeah, see, best available control technology, folks. Who got their card up first? Jill, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask because I know the 617 timeline is really quick, so it'd be useful if we could get updates in
Pretty
January.
much every-
Yeah,
yes.
like every time. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Mary, go ahead.
So just a little bit of a conversation in the Inland Empire. Just so that you know that the community is not just sitting around doing nothing about some of the concerns that they have coming up. The difficulty ends up being that even though they're organized to a certain extent and they appear before city councils and planning commissions in order to oppose some of the projects that are coming up, they're not successful at it, and it can be for a variety of reasons. We all know Moreno Valley is still looking at the World Logistics Center, and that's still a topic of conversation within that community. And you've got some serious city council elections coming up in a couple of weeks that everybody is indicating is all connected to what's going to happen with that World Logistics Center and who's paying for what. So Moreno Valley's still in an uproar based on that part of it. There's still not enough information in the community about where exactly the reality exists on that World Logistics Center, but it's still on the table for everybody's minds. But then in Riverside, you have a development that is just almost completed. It's a huge apartment complex sitting right on the railroad. I mean, right next to it. And it's supposed to be for a low-income area because it's in the east side. And so it's right off of University Avenue, and it sits right next to the railroad tracks. And the whole concept there is supposed to be transit, so that they're close to the transportation issue. The unfortunate part is that development was initially identified as not just low income, but senior citizen housing. So I'm not exactly sure which senior citizens are going to really enjoy sitting next to the railroad tracks, because those railroad tracks are constant. It's not just every once in a while, they're constant. And one time I sat at the crossing and I counted 200 and something cars go by. And that's a typical one for BNSF. So it's like nothing new. But then you have another development that just ended up getting approved through the Planning Commission. It's on the outskirts of Riverside. It's in the north side. It's off of Center Street, and it's a warehouse development that has been approved. And it was challenged because of the level of truck traffic. And everything around it is residential. And right across the street from the warehouse are the Ab Brown soccer fields. So it's like you're going to end up putting all of these trucks next to an athletic field that's there that has been used now for a decade for children, but that's where they put it. And then you go up the street on Spruce, and they just approved another warehouse development. The indication is that it's going to have a constant 134 truck load capacity on a regular basis. And it sits next to the railroad tracks, and it sits in a residential community across the street from a church. And so all of these developments are going up. The community is coming out to the sessions to complain and to request that, environmental impact reports be done, and to make sure, that all of the things in consideration of the consequences are taken care of. But it doesn't make any difference. I hate saying it. I mean, it's like I've, watched it happen, and they're there and they're in mass, but it all depends on who's sitting on these commissions and who's sitting on the city councils. And unfortunately, I hate saying it, but money talks. And that's what a lot of this translates into, is money. So it's just FYI.
Yeah, that's good to know. For your information, the staff here is doing research on the development of an indirect source rule for warehouses. So they're trying to figure out how to approach the complicated issue of who can be required to do what. And, you know, it's good to keep them informed of other warehouse projects that are being approved. And maybe staff might want to put some of the ISR folks in touch with Mary so that she can tell them about what's going on there. I think everybody knows about World Logistics Center, but some of these other ones kind of, there's so many that are happening that it's almost impossible to keep track of.
So Dr. Lou, let me ask you a question though, really quickly. In our role here, would it help us if we, when these projects are identified and they come up and we have the links to, you know, whatever it is, would it help if we send it to you? See, I'm under the impression that you probably already know, but maybe some of the smaller ones, or maybe like the newer one on Spruce, I don't think you do.
So it depends on what type of environmental review is going on.
Okay.
So the agencies that are proposing to approve these projects, if it hits a certain threshold in terms of the California Environmental Quality Act, they're required to notify AQMD. We get, I don't know, every month probably, how would you say, 100 or so notices? About 100 notices, sequent notices.
Okay.
And staff sifts through them, and where they think it's appropriate, they will send a comment letter. And sometimes they're very basic kind of form letters, and sometimes they're more detailed comments, depending upon the issue. I guess the question would be whether or not they know about all of these things. I'm not sure that they do, because some of them will be approved through a process that doesn't require them to notify the agencies. So it's a little hard to tell without kind of looking at the specific project and checking back to see whether or not it showed up to AQMD for comment. David had a card up. Carrie, you had a card up too. You still want to? No. Okay. We'll go to David and then Noretta.
The lingering cards. I just wanted to say the Baldwin Hills is in September selected a part of the SNAPS program that's being implemented by CARB, and SNAPS is the study of neighborhood and air pollution. Study of neighborhood air near petroleum sources. It's a long one, but they've been awarded the opportunity to be a part of the SNAPS program. We're looking forward to working in coordination with them because I'm on the community advisory panel for the Baldwin Hills oil field and Inglewood oil field. The timing of it, I think, is going to happen after we finish our health study, and right now I'm trying to coordinate the possibility of either making our health study go further out so we can use the information from SNAPS included in it, because the health component is a major piece of the SNAPS program, the air monitoring and the particulates. The other option would be to move up our time, but there's 3 other communities ahead of us, or oil fields ahead of us, and we're just trying to figure out how to coordinate that. But I just want to say gratitude to California Air Resources Board, and be excited about the SNAPS program being implemented in the neighborhoods in and around the Baldwin Hills.
Thank you for that update.
In regards to the warehouse situation, is there anything being done in the way of requiring, when these large complexes are being approved, that certain requirements be met, such as electric trucks going to and from?
That's what this indirect source review rule is supposed to do. But it's a complicated thing, and there's the latest work group. There's a series of work group meetings that are being held about it, and the latest one from the staff has a lot of information about what they're thinking of how to structure potential regulations. Maybe if we could share, Alicia, if we could share that presentation, the indirect source rule warehouse presentation with the members. It's really interesting. I actually toured the UPS warehouse in Ontario with staff and met with UPS representatives about how they actually use their warehouse. It's fascinating of what they're doing. And they're right up against the Ontario airport, and they're actually going to make it so they can bring a plane right to the warehouse and load directly onto it, which will save them 10 minutes, which translates into like millions, tens of millions of dollars. 10 minutes. It's just, it's incredible. So there's a lot to learn. Staff is going out to different types of warehouses. I think last I talked to Ian, he's getting out to Amazon warehouse soon in Ontario to take a look at that, because instead of just handling the boxes, they're actually, putting the Amazon products into the boxes and shipping them out, which is a different operation from just moving boxes, which is what UPS does. But it's a tough one. It's a real tough one. It'll be interesting to see what staff ends up proposing.
And maybe how close are we to the technology of electric semis, trucks, that sort of thing? So that it can happen as soon as
You're asking a complicated question. People have and have built heavy-duty semi-trucks. It's not as if you can show up to a truck dealership and buy them off the lot. After Tesla did their quote-unquote reveal of their semi-truck, a lot of the other standard truck makers have made proposals to do their own, and we have funded them in the tune of many tens of millions of dollars in order for them to do it. And there is at least one other company that is promising to actively manufacture them. When it comes to electric trucks, the batteries are very heavy, the range is limited, and the cost is very high. So it's not today a practical solution for moving everything that we need to move right now, but there are other ways of dealing with it, including overhead catenary, zero-emission fuel cells, near-zero-emission trucks, and a whole lot of other things. So it's a complicated issue. I spend way too much time on this stuff, but it's getting closer every day. It's getting closer every day. It takes a long time to charge the EVs. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's some good things and some bad things, and in some applications it might work. It'll be a while before all the heavy-duty trucks in the country are going to be zero emission. Yeah, Danny.
Yeah, I've had a hard time reconciling the difference between the warehouses and the jobs. I've been close to the issues in Moreno Valley, and we've had economists that have come out and mentioned that the future in jobs is in logistics and medical, So I've had a hard time reconciling this.
One economist in particular in the Inland Empire, but yes.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
And, but a lot of it is the complaints about the emissions of all these trucks that are servicing these warehouses. So why couldn't these, if they're going to have diesel trucks, make them be that they don't emit diesel emissions, It's part of the giving them the permits to build the warehouses. Of course, then you have the traffic. I drive from Woodcrest to San Bernardino to work every day, and I mean the freeway is almost full of trucks.
Yeah.
I always thought they're supposed to be on the right fire red lane. They're over here on, blocking us.
Yep.
Nobody monitors that. So I've got a lot of problem reconciling these two differences.
So I think I've told everybody, I listen to podcasts to keep myself sane when I'm driving. A couple of weeks ago, Latino USA podcast did a special on warehouses, warehouse growth, warehouse workers. I would recommend going to Latino USA and downloading that podcast and listening to it. Kind of interesting stuff. But they talk about this very issue. Are they good jobs? Are they bad jobs? Are they going to be automated? What's automated? What isn't? They toured an Amazon warehouse too and talked to Amazon worker or some other warehouse workers. But it is one of the fastest job growth industries is warehouse workers. Most of them are actually temporary workers, not employees. So it brings up a lot of issues. And because it's a fast and growing industry, the question of wages, you know, is kind of the classic thing where Amazon is now having to pay a little bit more. I think they're going to a minimum of $16 an hour because they have to get people to work there. But you know, how what the work is like is not something I think I'd want to do for a living. But Latino USA, go to the website, download the podcast, listen to it. Let me know what you think. Anyone else? Good, we're done here. Oh, I had something. Our January meeting is scheduled for January 25th. I've got someone who wants me to be someplace else that day. If there's a possibility, if we could take a poll of perhaps moving that a week in one direction or another. Actually, if we move it a week into February, that would conflict with our governing board meeting, but yeah, hold on. I didn't even look before I suggested that, so let's take a look. We got mobile source, stationary source, and then I could come here. I don't know about staff, but that's a possibility. I'll be here already that day. So we're going to probably take a poll on that one if we could. Yeah, and see if it works. Maybe I'll talk Councilmember Benoit into doing it. Yeah, if I can't make it. So that was just that one other thing under other business. So, okay, that's in terms of other business. Any public comment? We don't have anybody from the public? Then good. Then we'll stand adjourned until January, date to be determined, tentatively the 25th, but maybe the 18th. Thank you again for coming out. Great conversation, everyone.